At Christmas dinner, I raised my glass, looked straight at my mom, and said the words I thought would finally make her smile. Mom, thank you again for the $1,000. I know it wasn't easy. You saved me this month. Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. The clatter of plates, the murmur of cousins arguing over mashed potatoes, the tinny Christmas playlist from the living room, all of it seemed to mute at once. My mother's eyes locked on mine, sharp, almost afraid. Joy, she said slowly, what $1,000? The room went quiet in a way I'd only heard once before, the day my parents told us Grandma had died. My father shifted at the head of the table. My younger brother, Evan, stopped laughing mid-sentence. My husband, Mark, stiffened beside me. I forced a little laugh, cheeks burning. The transfer you sent last week, the one that hit my account on Tuesday, $1,000 even. Her face drained of color. She set her fork down carefully, like she was disarming a bomb. I didn't send you $1,000, she said. I wired 1 million. For a heartbeat, nobody breathed. My father coughed. Linda, that's enough, he muttered, reaching for her wrist, but she shook him off, eyes never leaving mine. Check your banking app, she said. Right now. My chest tightened. Somewhere behind me, the fake fireplace crackled on the flat screen, looping a video of burning logs. I pulled my phone from my pocket, hands suddenly slick. The deposit was still there in my checking account history. Incoming wire, L. Carter, $1,000. I turned the screen so she could see. This is what I got. Her lips parted. She reached for her own phone, the one Dad always teased her about for having the screen font so big you could read texts from across the room. Her fingers trembled as she opened her banking app, tapped to recent transfers. My father's jaw clenched. There must be a mistake, he said quickly. You never... He stopped when Mom found it. The line glowed on her screen in crisp black text. Outgoing wire to Joy Carter, $1 million. The date was the same as mine. The timestamp was the same minute. My stomach dropped so fast I grabbed the edge of the table. Evan leaned over from across the table, eyes wide. $1 million? You wired Joy $1 million. Mom didn't answer him. She just whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Where did the other $999,000 go? My father rose abruptly, napkin crumpling in his fist. This is obviously some banking error. We'll call them tomorrow. Nobody panic. But it wasn't his face I was watching. It was Mark's. My husband's expression hadn't gone pale like Mom's or angry like Dad's. Instead, something flickered across his features and vanished like a mask had slipped for half a second and snapped back into place. Yeah, he said too quickly. Probably just a glitch. Banks mess up all the time. My heart hammered. No, they don't, I thought. Not like this. If you've ever sat at a table full of family, convinced you knew the story, only to realize you'd missed the real plot entirely, you know that sick, spinning feeling in your gut. The one that says something is very, very wrong, and you're the last to find out. Before I tell you what happened after that Christmas dinner, and how a missing $999,000 exposed every lie I'd been living with, tell me this. Have you ever discovered a secret about your own family that made you question every kindness they'd ever done for you? If you're comfortable, share it and where you're watching from. It helps to know we're not the only ones who've smiled through a meal while the ground shifted under our feet. Because that night in my parents' dining room in Portland, Oregon, everything I thought I knew about money, loyalty, and marriage cracked open with one line on a phone screen. And it all started long before that wire ever went missing. My name is Joy Carter. I'm 36, a financial analyst turned reluctant entrepreneur. And until this year, I was the dutiful oldest child who never made waves. Growing up, money in our house was like religion, talked about in parables, never in specifics, always controlled by my father. Dad, Daniel Carter, built his identity on being the provider. He was the one with the CPA license, the corner office at a regional accounting firm, the suits that smelled faintly of starch and confidence. Mom had been a nurse before I was born, but stepped back to raise us, Dad's phrase, not hers. From as far back as I can remember, if you wanted anything serious, tuition help, a car, a decision about moving, you didn't ask my mother. You asked my father. And he weighed the request like a judge handing down a sentence. Your mother and I will discuss it. He'd say, but we all knew decisions were made in his home office, not at the kitchen table. Evan never minded. He flourished under Dad's watchful eye, soaked up mentorship like sunshine. I learned to adapt in a different way. I became the one who didn't need much. The girl who did her homework without being told, who read library books instead of asking for new ones, who got a partial scholarship to a state school and worked 2 campus jobs to cover the rest. Every time Dad told the story about my responsible choices, people smiled. Nobody seemed to notice that what he was really proud of was how little he'd had to invest in me. After college, I landed a junior role at a financial research firm in Seattle. I loved the patterns in the numbers, the way spreadsheets told stories if you knew how to read them. I started tracking more than market movements. I watched people, how they treated money, how money changed them. When I met Mark, I thought I'd finally met someone who understood. We worked in the same building, him in fintech sales, me upstairs, analyzing portfolios. He was charming, funny, the kind of man who remembered your coffee order after one work meeting and made everyone in the elevator feel like they'd known him for years. We married 3 years later. Dad loved him immediately. Sharp kid, he said, understands how money works. I took that as a blessing. It would take me nearly a decade to realize it was a warning. 4 years into the marriage, I had what I thought was my big break. The company I worked for gutted my department in a restructure and offered 2 choices: take a demotion and a brutal workload, or accept a decent severance and leave. I took the package. Mark and I had been talking for months about an idea I'd been nurturing, a platform that simplified long-term budgeting and investment planning for ordinary people. Not flashy day trading nonsense, but real, sober tools to help families like mine avoid, well, exactly the kind of secrets I was about to uncover. You should build it. Mark had said so many nights, eyes bright, I'll help. I know tons of people in fintech. We can bootstrap with savings until we raise seed funding. It sounded daring and smart, and for once, like a chance to build something that wasn't just a line on a spreadsheet for someone else's benefit. Dad, predictably, hated the idea. Startups fail, he said flatly when I told my parents over Sunday dinner. You're walking away from security. Mom had opened her mouth, then closed it when he shot her a look. I told myself it was normal parental worry. I was 33 then, but in his eyes, I'd always be the college kid balancing trays at the campus cafe. Mark and I drained most of our savings in the first year getting the prototype off the ground. He did introductions, handled early sales calls, polished pitch decks. I wrote the models, built the framework, spent nights reading regulatory rules until my eyes blurred. We were 3 months from launch when everything started to wobble. Venture capital interest cooled suddenly, right when we thought we had 2 funds circling. One partner backed out, citing concerns about founder alignment. Another quietly hinted that Mark's personal debt profile had spooked their risk committee. That was the first I'd heard of any personal debt. When I confronted him, Mark waved it off. Old stuff from before we got married. A couple of credit cards and an investment property that went sideways. It's under control. What investment property? I asked. He kissed my forehead and said, It's complicated, babe. We'll talk about it after the holidays. Right now you need to focus on the pitch. I wanted to believe him, so I did. But the runway was shrinking. We needed at least another couple $100,000 to get through the next 6 months without gutting the product or handing the company to a predatory investor. That's when Mom called me out of the blue on a Thursday morning in late November. Her voice was softer than I remembered. "How's work, honey?" "Really?" I was alone in the little co-working office we rented downtown, surrounded by whiteboards filled with user flows and revenue projections. The truth poured out before I could pretty it up. The vanished investors, the money we'd already sunk in, the way I lay awake at night wondering if I'd dragged us both off a financial cliff. There was a silence on the line that felt heavy, like she was weighing something large and fragile. "Your father doesn't tell you much about our finances," she said at last. I gave a humorless laugh. "He doesn't tell you much about your finances." She didn't argue. Then she told me something I'd never known. When her older sister died 5 years earlier, leaving no children, she'd inherited a stake in a medical tech company they'd both quietly invested in as young nurses. The company had been bought out that year. Her share of the buyout, just over $1.2 million. "Your father insisted we put most of it in conservative funds for retirement," she said, "but it's my name on the accounts. I can decide what happens to it." My throat closed. "Mom, you don't need to." "I know I don't," she interrupted gently. "I want to. I've watched you work yourself sick for other people since you were 22. If this is what you believe in, I want you to have room to build it without begging strangers for permission." I argued anyway. $1 million was more money than I'd ever seen outside a business forecast. I didn't want to be the child who drained her mother's future. She listened to every objection, then said, "Joy, I'm almost 62. We're not destitute. The house is paid off. Your father's retirement accounts would be fine even without my help. And I need you to understand something. This isn't charity. It's an investment in the one person I trust to make sense of numbers and people." She paused, voice steady. "I'm wiring you $1 million. Use it to keep the company under your control. Pay me back or don't. Just don't tell your father until it's done." I sat there staring at the office wall, phone pressed to my ear, shaking. "You do that?" I whispered. "I already called the bank," she said. "We need some paperwork. I'll go in tomorrow." The next day I texted her, heart pounding. "Did you change your mind?" She replied an hour later with a photo of a wire transfer confirmation. I saw the amount first, $1,000,000.00. Then the line that read beneficiary. Joy Carter, Cascade National Bank, account ending 4412. That was my checking account, the same one mark and I used for household expenses. I stared until the numbers blurred. The idea that my safety net had gone from a few thousand to 7 figures in one move was dizzying. Mark came home that night to find me still at the kitchen table, laptop open but untouched. I showed him the screenshot. For a second, 1 second, pure, naked greed flashed across his face. Then he whistled low. "Wow, your mom is generous. She believes in what we're building," I said, half apologetic, half giddy. "I don't want to waste it." "We won't," he said, already pacing the kitchen. "This changes everything. We can negotiate better terms, maybe skip this round and go straight to a series once we launch." "Did she say when it would hit?" "Today," I said, "but the bank said international wires can take a bit." I checked my account 3 times that night before I went to bed. Nothing. The following afternoon, a deposit finally appeared. Incoming wire, L. Carter, $1,000. I stared at the extra zeros that weren't there. $1,000. I scrolled back to Mom's screenshot. $1 million. It crossed my mind it might just be a limit issue, some maximum transfer she'd misread. Maybe she'd talked herself down overnight. I didn't want to make her feel guilty. So I texted, "Got the transfer. Thank you. You didn't have to send that much." She replied with a smiley face, and, "Good. Proud of you. Don't tell your father yet. Red heart." I hesitated, then let it go. I told Mark it had come through, for now, as 1,000 until she sorted out the rest. He just nodded. "Yeah, banks can be weird about large transfers. I'll look into it." He never brought it up again. I was too busy trying to keep the company alive to push. We stretched the 1,000 to pay a couple of overdue software bills and our personal rent. I told myself Mom had reconsidered, that she'd decided protecting her retirement was wiser. And then Christmas came. We drove up to Portland on Christmas Eve, the city lights smearing against the windshield in the rain. Mark hummed along to the radio, fingers tapping the steering wheel. I stared out at the blurred storefronts, trying not to think about what would happen if we didn't find new funding by February. That's how I ended up at my parents' table the next night, raising a glass over turkey and cranberry sauce, thanking my mother for money that had saved us from exactly one late fee, only to learn she'd set $1 million loose in my direction, and nearly all of it had vanished between her bank and mine. And the 3 people with the most access to those accounts were sitting within arm's reach. In the awkward, frozen silence after Mom's revelation, I heard the faint clink of my father's wedding ring against his wine glass as he squeezed it too tight. "Sit down, Daniel," Mom said quietly. "This isn't a bank glitch." He didn't move. "I manage our wires," he snapped. "If something went wrong, I'd know." I turned to him. "Did you know she was sending me that money?" His gaze flicked from me to Mom and back again. For the first time in my life, my father looked cornered. "Of course I knew," he said finally. "We discussed using a portion to help you." Not, he gestured at Mom's screen, "this insanity." Mom's chair scraped back. "You refused," she said, voice shaking but loud. "You called it irresponsible. So I went to the bank alone." Evan whistled under his breath. "Wow." Dad shot him a look that shut him up. He turned back to Mom. "You're confused. You didn't move $1 million. She thrust the phone toward him. "Then what is this?" He snatched it, eyes flicking over the details. His ears reddened. "Must be a misentry," he muttered. "We'll deal with it later. This is Christmas dinner." "Or," I said, pulse thudding in my throat, "somebody diverted the money between your account and mine." All eyes swung to me. Mark let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Come on, Joy. You think somebody just stole nearly $1 million in transit? That's not how it works." I looked at him carefully. "You said you'd look into why only 1,000 came through." He stiffened. "I did. The bank said large wires can be held up for compliance checks. I assumed the rest would follow." Mom frowned. "Then why doesn't my account show it as pending?" I heard the click of gears in my own head. I'd spent enough years analyzing financial flows to know. If the sending account showed a completed $1 million wire and the receiving account had only 1,000, the missing 999,000 had gone somewhere else, which meant either the bank systems were catastrophically broken or someone had rerouted the funds. By the time we'd stumbled through dessert, the warmth had gone from the room. Mom picked at her slice of pie. Dad poured himself bourbon he didn't need. Evan escaped to the couch, pretending to care deeply about a basketball game. I found Mom in the kitchen scraping plates. "Forward me the transfer confirmation?" I asked quietly. "All of it. Screenshots, emails, everything." She searched my face. "What are you going to do?" "What I get paid to do," I said. "Follow the money." Mark appeared in the doorway, forcing a smile. "Hey, are we heading out soon? Roads might ice." "I'm staying the night," I said. "You go ahead if you're tired." His smile faltered. "You sure?" "Yes." I met his eyes. I need to go to the bank with Mom, first thing in the morning. He hesitated, then shrugged. Okay, call me. When he'd gone and the house was quieting, I sat at the kitchen table with Mom's phone and mine lined up side by side, analyzing. The routing numbers matched. The date matched. The beneficiary bank, Cascade National, matched. Only one thing was different. The beneficiary account number on Mom's confirmation ended in 4412, my joint account with Mark. But under it, in smaller text, was a reference line I hadn't noticed before, for deposit to investment subaccount, per standing instructions. Standing instructions. I felt my chest go cold. Banks will, under certain conditions, follow sweep instructions, move incoming funds above a threshold automatically to another account, often a brokerage, a line of credit, or a high-yield savings. It was the sort of thing someone like my father would set up to avoid idle cash sitting in low-interest accounts. It was also the sort of thing that, if abused, could quietly redirect a windfall somewhere the primary account holder never saw. Mom, I said slowly, has Dad ever had you sign anything about automatic sweeps or internal investment accounts? She frowned. He has me sign lots of things. He says it's for our retirement plans. Do you have access to view those accounts? She gave a small, bitter laugh. You know, I don't. He says it's too confusing, that I'd only worry. My phone buzzed. An email from Cascade National's fraud department confirmed my request for an appointment the next morning. I looked at my mother, the woman who had spent 3 decades working night shifts and double shifts, who had packed my lunches and whispered multiplication tables with me at the kitchen table, who had just tried to slide her entire safety net under my feet and felt something raw and sharp uncoil inside me. For years, I'd accepted that the men around me knew more about money than I did, that my job was to be good with numbers in ways that helped their plans. But there on that chair in my childhood kitchen, I realized something simple and devastating. They weren't better with money. They just had more power over it. And Mom and I had finally stumbled over a place where their control might be provably legally wrong. The next morning, we walked into the downtown branch, bundled against the icy wind. Dad had stayed home, nursing his hangover. Mark had texted once, "How's it going?" and then gone silent when I replied. At the bank, the account manager, a woman in her 40s with calm eyes, led us to a glass-walled office. I explained the situation in careful, neutral terms. Outgoing wire receipt from my mother's account for $1 million, incoming credit to my account for $1,000, discrepancy unexplained. She pulled up both profiles on her screen, lips pressing into a line as she scrolled. "Okay," she said after a moment. "I see the outgoing. $1 million from Mrs. Carter's personal brokerage sweep to your household account ending in 4412. That was processed 7 days ago. And the incoming—" I asked. She clicked to my profile. "Visible deposit of $1,000. Yes. But—" She paused. "But what?" Mom demanded. "There's an internal transfer trail attached," the manager said slowly. "We need to pull it from the back end. Do I have your permission to involve our compliance team?" "Yes," I said at once. Mom nodded. We waited in strained silence while she made a call, rattled off reference numbers, listened, then turned back to us. "There was a standing instruction on your account," she said. "Any incoming wire over $5,000 was to be split. $1,000 retained in checking, the remainder swept into an investment account ending in 3347. My pulse spiked. "Whose account is 3,347 registered to?" She checked. Her expression changed. "It's an LLC, Carter Strategic Holdings." She glanced at my mother. "Mrs. Carter, your husband is the authorized manager. And so is your son, Evan." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. I swallowed. "And my name?" She shook her head. "You're not on this LLC." Of course I wasn't. Can you show when those instructions were set up? I asked, voice tight. 2 years ago, she said. Authorized by your husband, Mrs. Carter, as joint account holder with a consent form. It appears your signature is on file. Mom stared at the screen as if she could will it to say something different. I don't remember. She trailed off, color draining from her cheeks. I pictured my father sliding a stack of papers across the kitchen table. Sign these, Linda. They're just updates. He'd done it my whole life. Is this illegal? I asked bluntly. The manager hesitated. It's murky. Technically, both joint holders can set standing instructions. If Mrs. Carter's signature is on the consent form, the bank assumed agreement. But if that signature was obtained under false pretenses or misrepresented, you may have a civil case, especially because the beneficiary LLC excludes you, Ms. Carter, despite the funds being clearly intended as a personal gift. She lowered her voice. If you'd like, I can refer you to an attorney we work with on financial abuse cases. The words landed like stones. Financial abuse. My mother sat back, eyes suddenly blazing through the tears. I want a copy of every document my husband signed, she said, and I want to freeze those instructions. Right now. The manager nodded quickly. We can do that. By the time we walked back out into the cold, we had more than just wind cutting at our faces. We had a paper trail, the original $1 million wire from Mom's personal funds. The automatic sweep instruction Daniel Carter had quietly added to our household account, routing every large incoming transfer to his and Evans LLC. A ledger of recent flows showing tens of thousands over the past 2 years had taken the same path: tax refunds, small inheritances. Even a bonus Mark had received from a previous employer that I'd thought had simply gone to bills. That last part made my stomach twist. Why would Dad include Evan? I asked as we sat in Mom's car, heat blasting. She gave a small, sad shrug. He thinks your brother will carry the family legacy if anything happens to him, just like he thinks you're too independent to need help. The words sounded like a line she'd heard so often she'd stopped questioning it. I turned the sheaf of copies in my hand. LLC articles of organization, authorization forms, standing instruction agreements. At the bottom of one page, a scrawled, slanted version of my mother's name looked nothing like her usual looping script. Did you sign this? I asked, showing her. She squinted. The L is wrong, and I never abbreviate my middle initial. Then that's forgery, I said. The quietness in my voice startled even me. Mark called 3 times that afternoon. I let them all go to voicemail. By the time we got back to the house, my father was at his desk, going through envelopes as if nothing were wrong. Evan had taken off, probably to avoid the fallout he sensed brewing. Where have you two been? Dad asked without looking up. At the bank, Mom said. Silence dropped like a stone. Dad slowly set the papers down and turned. That was unnecessary, he said. I told you I'd handle it. You did handle it, I replied. You handled it straight into an LLC you and Evan own. His eyes narrowed. I don't know what you think you understood. You diverted nearly $1 million meant for me. I cut in, holding up the stack, without telling Mom, without telling me, using a standing instruction on my account that was never explained. His gaze flicked to the documents. You're overreacting. That money is still within the family. I was going to allocate it sensibly instead of watching you blow it on a pipe dream startup. Something in me snapped, not into rage, but into a cold clarity I recognized from deal rooms right before someone admitted they'd been caught. You mean, I said, you were going to use it to patch the hole Evan blew in your retirement day trading crypto and buy-to-let condos. His face went still. You think I don't know? I went on. I analyzed your LLC's public filings on the drive back. I know about the underwater rentals and the margin calls. You needed cash to plug those gaps before the bank called your loans. Mom staggered back a step, as if I'd pushed her. Daniel, she whispered. He glared at me, the mask fully gone now. You always thought you were smarter than the rest of us. But you're blind, Joy. Startups eat cash and spit out failure. I was protecting our assets. By stealing mine, I said calmly, "It's not stealing if it stays with blood." He snapped. I looked at him, the man who taught me that numbers never lie, and then spent 2 years bending them around his fears. Mom's name is on that account, I said. She chose to give that money to me. You chose to override her. He bristled. She doesn't understand what $1 million really is. She would have thrown it away. Mom flinched like he'd slapped her. I understand exactly what it is, she said quietly. It's the first time in my life someone trusted me with more than grocery money. And you decided it made you the only adult in the room. My father snorted. Don't be ridiculous. Linda, it's not ridiculous. I said, it's financial abuse. The word hung in the air like a shockwave. Dad took a step toward me. You don't get to throw legal terms around in my house. I met his gaze without flinching. I do when I'm about to hire a forensic accountant and a lawyer. For the first time that day, true fear flickered in his eyes. Joy, he said, tone softening, almost coaxing. You're upset. Fine. We'll reallocate a portion back to you. No, Mom said sharply. Both of us turned. She straightened, shoulders squaring. You will transfer every cent from that LLC that came from standing instructions on our accounts back where it belongs, she said, to Joy. Then we'll talk about whether you sleep in this house tonight. He opened his mouth, closed it. That LLC is legally separate. Then I'll legally separate, she said, and I'll do it with a lawyer who has copies of every forged signature you collected over the last 10 years. He stared at her like he was seeing a stranger. When did you become this dramatic? He asked. When I realized you'd rather bankrupt our daughter than admit our son can't handle money, she replied. I exhaled slowly. The next week was a blur of appointments. We sat in a wood-paneled office with a women-owned law firm downtown, while an attorney named Priya skimmed the documents and nodded grimly. This is textbook, she said. Spousal financial control. Misuse of joint accounts. Possibly criminal if we can prove intent to defraud. She outlined our options. File a civil suit against my father and the LLC for unjust enrichment and conversion of funds. Seek a restraining order limiting his access to Mom's accounts. Notify the bank formally of suspected signature forgery, triggering their own investigation. And, if necessary, alert state authorities about elder financial abuse, given Mom's age. Mom's hands trembled, but her voice was steady. Will this destroy him? She asked. Priya didn't sugarcoat it. It will damage him professionally. As a CPA, he's held to a fiduciary standard. But you have to ask yourself, does he deserve to keep that status after this? I thought of Dad lecturing us on ethics, on doing right even when nobody is watching, while quietly siphoning money from his wife and daughter to cover his mistakes and his favorite child's gambling. No, I said, he doesn't. We filed the suit. In parallel, I took steps of my own. If my father thought he could decide how my company was funded, he was about to get an education in what control really looked like. I moved the original $1,000 and every cent of remaining joint cash into a new business account solely in my name. I met with our startup's corporate lawyer and redrafted our cap table, documenting Mom's intended investment with a convertible note that would give her a meaningful stake once we formalized our next round. Then, with Priya's guidance, I petitioned the court for a temporary freeze on Carter Strategic Holdings, the LLC that had swallowed my $1 million. The judge, clearly unimpressed with the pattern laid out in our filing, granted it while we awaited a hearing, which is how, 3 months after that Christmas dinner, My father and brother found themselves sitting across from me in a neutral conference room downtown, flanked by their lawyers, expecting to negotiate family arrangements. They thought we were there to hammer out a compromise. They didn't realize Mom and I had already moved the battlefield. The conference room smelled like stale coffee and anxiety. On one side of the long table sat my father, lips pressed in a hard line, and Evan jittering his knee under his chair. Their attorney, a gray-haired man with an expensive watch, shuffled papers. On our side, Mom and I sat shoulder to shoulder. Priya organized our binders with clinical calm. A court reporter sat up in the corner, fingers poised over her stenotype. "Let's begin," Priya said. "We're here to discuss the disposition of funds diverted from Joy Carter's intended gift, as well as potential remedies for the unauthorized sweep instructions and forged consent forms." Dad huffed. "We're here to correct a misunderstanding. The money is still in the LLC. Nobody diverted anything." Priya slid a document across the table. "The bank records show otherwise. You used roughly $600,000 to cover margin calls and refinance properties under Evan's name. Another $200,000 went to speculative crypto positions that are now nearly worthless. Only $173,000 remains liquid." Evan shifted uncomfortably. Dad shot him a look. Market conditions changed. The attorney said smoothly, "My client suffered losses, yes, but that's not criminal. It's unfortunate." Priya folded her hands. "The losses aren't criminal. The way you funded them may be. You obtained Mrs. Carter's signature under false pretenses, misrepresented the purpose of the instructions, and systematically siphoned funds intended for Joy." The attorney opened his mouth, but I cut in, speaking clearly for the record. "My mother exercised her legal right to gift me $1 million. I said, my father and brother chose to hide that gift from me and use it for their own purposes. That's not a misunderstanding. That's theft wearing a family name tag." Evan flushed. We were going to pay it back when the next deal closed. Priya raised an eyebrow. "Which deal? The sublet in Vancouver that's 3 months delinquent, or the condo in Phoenix that's now underwater?" Silence. Dad squared his shoulders. "You're not the only one who needs help, Joy. Evan's business hit a rough patch. I made a judgment call to keep everything afloat." Mom's voice cut through like a wire. "You made that call with my money," she said, "and Joy's, without telling either of us." He turned to her, something like righteousness heating his tone. "I've supported this family for 35 years, he said. "I've bailed you out every time you overspent on the kids, every time something went wrong with the house. This time, I needed flexibility." I felt my own temper flare, then level out into something quiet. "Mom overspent on the kids." I repeated, "You mean like the time she priced out tutors for me, and you said it was unnecessary but wrote Evan a check for a new gaming rig because he was stressed?" His cheeks darkened. "This isn't about the past," he snapped. "It is when the past shows a pattern," Priya said calmly, "which brings us to our proposal." She outlined it with clinical precision. Carter Strategic Holdings would transfer the remaining liquid funds to my new business account within 5 business days. Dad and Evan would sign a confession of judgment acknowledging the initial $1 million as a gift misappropriated from the intended recipient. They would agree to a repayment plan for the remaining lost balance over 10 years, secured by liens on 2 of Evan's remaining properties. Dad would voluntarily report the conflict to his CPA licensing board and accept whatever sanctions followed, in exchange for Mom agreeing not to pursue separate criminal charges for forgery. For now, the other attorney scoffed. "These terms are absurd. Daniel would be ruined." Priya's eyes were cool. "He's already ruined his credibility. We're offering him a structured way to address that. If you'd prefer to roll the dice with a criminal investigation and possible elder abuse charges, We can. The room buzzed with tension. Dad reached for his water, hand shaking slightly. You'd really drag your own father through court? He asked me. I met his gaze. The hurt in his voice was real, but so were the bank statements. You dragged yourself here. I said softly, I'm just refusing to pretend it's fine. Evan leaned forward, eyes wild. You're going to destroy us over a technicality? A technicality? I echoed. You saw $1 million wire your grandmother equivalent figure sent meant to give me a chance, and you helped reroute it into your gambling fund. Then you went to a Christmas party and toasted family. That's not a technicality. Evan, that's who you chose to be. He opened his mouth to fire back, then closed it again, shoulders slumping for the first time. Dad stared at the ceiling, jaw clenched. The attorney murmured in his ear. They conferred in hushed tones for several minutes while I sat, feeling my heartbeat in my throat. Finally, Dad looked back at us. If I agree to this, he said slowly, will you drop the criminal threats? No cops, no complaints to the AG. Priya glanced at me and Mom. If all conditions are met and payments begin on schedule, we will hold off on formal criminal complaints. But if there is any default, we reserve all rights. Dad swallowed. Tears gathered at the corners of Mom's eyes, but they didn't fall. She spoke before I could. I never wanted this, she said. I wanted my husband to be the man I thought he was. I wanted my son to be responsible. I wanted my daughter to feel supported, not stolen from. But we are here because of your choices, Daniel. Not because Joy asked for too much. Not because I'm confused. Because you put loyalty to Evan and your own pride above honesty. He flinched as if she'd struck him. Then he nodded once, curtly. Fine, he said. We'll sign. The days that followed were anticlimactic in the way major legal shifts often are. There were no dramatic courtroom speeches, no slammed gavels. Just a series of signatures, notarizations, and emails confirming wire transfers. $173,000 landed in my new account. It wasn't the million Mom had intended, but it was a start. The rest would trickle in over years, assuming Evan kept up with payments and Dad didn't find another way to self-destruct. Priya warned us to treat those projected sums as theoretical until they arrived. In the meantime, something more important shifted. Mom moved half of her remaining assets into a trust with me as co-trustee, designed so no future partner could alter it without our joint consent. She got her own login credentials for every account. She started taking a financial literacy course for women at the community college. The first time she texted me a screenshot of her solo visit to the bank, with no Dad hovering in the background. I cried in the grocery store aisle between the cereal and the oatmeal. At home, the fallout was unavoidable. Dad's firm put him on administrative leave, pending the ethics board review. Some clients quietly moved their accounts elsewhere. Word travels fast in small professional circles. Evan sold 2 of his flashiest toys, the boat he'd named after an ex-girlfriend and the truck with custom rims he could never afford. He moved into a smaller place near the outskirts of town. I didn't gloat when Mom told me. I just nodded and updated the spreadsheet Priya had given me tracking repayments. Mark, though, was the loose thread I'd been avoiding pulling. In the weeks after Christmas, he'd gone from defensive to distant. Every time the topic of the missing funds came up, he deflected. It's between you and your parents. He said, I don't see why you're dragging the rest of us into it. Except he was the rest of us. The standing instruction that had rerouted the wire was on our joint account. We shared that liability, even if he claimed ignorance. One Saturday morning as we sat at our shared desk, him scrolling through social media, me reviewing product timelines, I finally asked the question that had been gnawing at me. When my mom's money hit the account, I said, and only 1,000 showed up. Did you really think it was just a banking quirk? He kept his eyes on his screen. I told you, these things happen. I'm a financial analyst, Mark. I've never seen a bank just lose $999,000 without a trace. He sighed heavily and swiveled his chair to face me. What do you want me to say, Joy? That I noticed something was off and didn't want to rock the boat? That I thought maybe your dad had a plan and it wasn't my business? Did you know about the sweep instructions? I pressed. He hesitated just a fraction too long. Your dad mentioned he had some automatic transfers set up, he admitted, but I assumed he'd clear anything big with you. Anger flared up my spine. You assumed the man who's told me my whole life I'm too emotional about money was going to voluntarily cede control? Really? His jaw tightened. I'm tired of you pitting me against your family. I grew up scrambling for every dime. Having a father-in-law who actually knows how to manage investments has been a blessing. Now you're turning him into a villain. He turned himself into a villain. I said quietly, you just didn't mind as long as his management might benefit you someday. He stared at me for a long moment. This crusade is going to consume you, he said finally, and it's going to sink the startup. Investors don't like messy founder drama. We don't have investors yet. I replied, but you're right about one thing. I can't build a company about transparency and empowerment while ignoring what's happening in my own accounts. What are you saying? He asked. I took a breath that felt like stepping off a ledge. I'm saying I want separate finances. I said, separate accounts. A clean cap table with only founders who are truly aligned. And I don't think that includes you anymore. His mouth fell open. You're kicking me out of the company we built together. We didn't build it together, Mark, I said, voice trembling but firm. I wrote every model. I stayed up every night doing the work while you networked and told people what we were building. And when someone tried to give me a chance to keep control, you looked away while my father stole it. That's not fair, he said hoarsely. Maybe, I said, but it's what happened. The end of a marriage isn't one conversation. It's an accumulation of all the ways you realize the person beside you is facing a different direction. But that conversation was the beginning. We negotiated a buyout of his small equity stake at a steep discount, more mercy than he'd shown me. He moved out a month later, slamming the door only once. The startup, ironically, began to attract more serious attention once I clarified the story. A women-led fund that specialized in ethical finance heard about the lawsuit through Priya's network. They invited me to pitch. Instead of hiding the drama, I wove it into the company's mission, building tools that made sure no one could be quietly cut out of their own money by helpful relatives or spouses. We don't want to be another flashy app, I told them. We want to be the boring, powerful infrastructure that keeps people from being blindsided at their own dinner tables. They invested, not $1 million, but enough to hire 2 engineers, to extend our runway, to launch a beta version that 6 months later would help hundreds of users uncover weird sweep patterns they'd never noticed. Mom was our first subscriber. She says she logs in every Sunday with her coffee and scrolls through the dashboards, delighted every time she understands a new chart without asking anyone for help. As for my father and Evan, the consequences settled in quietly like winter snow. The CPA board suspended Dad's license for 3 years pending remediation and oversight. He took on part-time bookkeeping work for small businesses who didn't know the full story. Some of his old friends stopped returning his calls when they learned why he'd vanished from firm newsletters. Evan kept up with payments. Barely. There were months he flirted with default, only to sell another toy or cut another luxury to stay out of court. Mom heard through the grapevine that he was bitter, that he told people I'd ruined the family. Maybe I did ruin something. But sometimes a thing is rotten enough that ruin is the only honest word. Mom spends most weekends with me now, driving down from Portland to Seattle with a trunk full of leftovers and half-finished knitting projects. We sit on my tiny balcony wrapped in blankets, her telling me stories about shifts in the ICU, me telling her about user churn and investor calls. Once, a few weeks before the anniversary of that Christmas dinner, she asked quietly, "Do you ever regret it? Pushing this hard?" I thought about the terrified look on her face when she saw that transfer confirmation, about the years she'd signed papers she half understood because she'd been taught not to ask questions, about the way my father had talked over us at every holiday, telling stories about his savvy decisions while Mom smiled politely, and I kept my head down. "No," I said, "I regret not asking sooner. I regret assuming you were okay with being left out." She nodded, eyes on the skyline. "Me too." On Christmas this year, we kept it small. Just Mom, me, a couple of friends who'd become family. We cooked too much food in my little kitchen, opened silly gifts, laughed at a cheesy movie. At dinner, Mom lifted her glass. To boring, honest bank transfers, she said, "Riley." We all laughed. I thought about the girl from a year ago, raising a glass in a different dining room, thanking her mother for $1,000 while 999,000 sat trapped in someone else's idea of what's best. I thought about how much harder it had been to confront the people I loved than any spreadsheet or legal document. And I realized something simple. Money is never just numbers. It's trust, power, belief. When someone messes with your money in secret, they're not just balancing columns. They're rewriting the story of who gets to matter. If you've ever sat where I sat, realizing that the people who claim to protect you were really protecting their own fears, know this: you are not crazy, you are not greedy, and you are not wrong for wanting full access to your own life. Ask to see the statements. Ask what the signatures mean. Ask where the missing zeros went. Because at the end of the day, love without honesty is just control, wearing a holiday sweater. And the best gift I ever got wasn't the million my mom tried to send. It was the moment we both decided we deserved to know exactly where every dollar and every promise really went